Good evening. I'm Pittsburgh City Councilman Daniel Lavelle,
And I'm Councilman Reverend Ricky Burgess.
and we welcome you to another episode, I guess, of Pittsburgh Black Matters. Black Pittsburgh Matters, excuse me. Black Pittsburgh Matters is a series of virtual town hall meetings affirming a citywide agenda that Black Pittsburgh does indeed matter. Black Pittsburgh Matters means Black Lives Matter. It means we must protect the health and safety of Black people. It means that Black communities matter. We must focus on rebuilding Black communities. And it means that Black wealth matters. We must work on increasing Black employment and entrepreneurship.
The Black community has been disproportionately affected by concurrent crises. The COVID-19 pandemic and its resulting economic crisis, and secondly, race relations, which is a public health crisis in our country. Normally, in times of crisis and great change, we'd be coming to you as the Black elected officials of Pittsburgh and having meetings across the city with our constituents, partners, and allies. Since we cannot do so safely in the current pandemic, we are now using this media and platform to come to you in the ways we can, to talk about what we're doing, discuss policy and legislation concerning Black Pittsburgh. These meetings will be available via Facebook, YouTube, and the city's cable channel. You can contact or ask questions via the Black Pittsburgh Matters Facebook page, or you can email us at blackpghmatters, that's blackpghmatters@gmail.com. So you can do that right now, either through our live feed or through our Facebook or through our email. Today's topic is the city's economic development role in rebuilding Black Pittsburgh.
Rev, it's important to note that economic development does not happen in a vacuum. It truly takes a team of dedicated professionals across various spectrums. And despite what we may say at times, when we're trying to gloat, no council person develops anything on their own. The role of city council people in facilitating economic development is to pull every available lever on behalf of their constituents and really help facilitate economic development. This means we must work with city agencies, local organizations, potential funders, foundations, schools and universities, community groups, and others to ensure that economic development happens, both housing and commercial. The city's Urban Redevelopment Authority, the Housing Authority, and the City Planning Department have been and are important partners in this work regarding project planning, funding, and management to ensure economic development happens. The HELP initiative has also been a partner in ensuring that economic development aligns with community desires and goals for economic development. Councilman Burgess and I believe I can speak for him in this case, are both deeply committed to ensuring economic development occurs in our districts. I myself sit on the board of the URA.
I've sat for many years on the Housing Authority board and formerly was the chair of that board for many, many years. Together, the URA, the Housing Authority, City Planning, and HELP have worked to rebuild the Black community, committing to economic development of traditional African American neighborhoods. I've been fortunate enough to build somewhere close to 2,000 units of housing in my council's district during my time on council. Together, we are working, as you know, on our newest project together, which is Avenues of Hope, the plans for economic development for the future of Black Pittsburgh. Avenues of Hope span 7 different business districts. I'll talk a little bit about mine, which is Homewood Avenue. We have done a comprehensive community plan. Homewood has a Homewood Development Collaborative. It is primed for doing development. We have the land. The idea, Homewood was once the 3rd or 4th largest business district in Pittsburgh. The idea is to rebuild and rebirth Homewood Avenue into a mixed income, mixed use community so that people can live on top of storefronts the way they did before, and people can walk to grocery stores and gas stations and clothing stores. And so we believe that by rebuilding Homewood Avenue, you also then begin to be able to rebuild all around it and bring the market back like we've done in Larimer. So we're looking forward very much to investment in rebuilding Homewood Avenue. And I think in your district, it's Center Avenue?
Yes, it is Center Avenue, which we have already begun working on. I'm really excited because we currently have it's either 6 or 7, I think it's 7 proposals that we are working with for redevelopment opportunities along center. Some is new construction, some is rehabilitation of older structures, but it's all commercial, as you also stated, with some housing above it. So we're looking at office space, we're looking at bringing back a barber shop, we're looking at building a salon along the avenue, and some others that we can get into. And I think what's most interesting about this is the process, and I'll save that for the deputy director of the URA to talk about. But the process we really implemented has allowed us to go find young minorities who want to be part of the rebirth of the Hill District and want to really focus on sort of putting their footprint on how we rebuild a Black community, and specifically doing it by Black developers.
Well, I think in order to get in this conversation, we are honored to have some very significant guests with us today. We are honored to be joined by Mr. Ron Porter from the HELP Initiative, Mr. Christopher Corbett from Pittsburgh City Planning, and Ms. Diamonte Walker, Deputy Executive Director of the URA, and finally, Ms. Monique Pierre, Chief Development Officer for the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh. Everyone, welcome, and welcome to tonight's edition of Black Pittsburgh Matters.
Thank you.
So maybe Mr. Porter, because we mentioned it in the beginning, the HELP Initiative, maybe if you could just walk us through what the HELP Initiative is, how it functions, and what it's looking to accomplish.
The HELP Initiative is it's designed to really bring together multiple stakeholders and communities. Earlier on, when you were making your introduction, you said that it takes us all. And one of the things that the HELP Initiative does is it encourages and facilitates community collaboration. Through the present date, we've been active in the East End for about 4 or 5 years. And during that time, we have been, when I say we, Pam Collier, who's my fellow consultant with the HELP program, we have worked with community leaders in each of the 5 neighborhoods to really do 3 or 4 things. One is to really develop a structure for comprehensive planning. What does the community look like when it is fully operationalized? How do we most effectively meld the skills and talents of multiple community organizations into a coherent plan? We facilitate comprehensive planning. We facilitate meetings. At times, we get involved in resolving differences of perspectives that might exist among community members. We work a lot with building capacity, that as opportunities grow, some nonprofits find themselves really ill-prepared because of their size and resources to fit in, and we work with them to grow their capacity so that they can be full partners in planning. And then the most important thing is that we help to identify capital that can be available. Working in the East End with Councilman Burgess primarily, and with people like Bridgeway Capital and the foundation community, we begin to identify where investments can be made and where resources may come from. It's important to note that the HELP staff, Pam and I, are primary facilitators, and while we have technical knowledge, it's important to note that the leadership of all of the initiatives that we work in comes from the community. And that success is programs like the Avenue of Hope, the restoration of Homewood Avenue, rehabbing houses, also really developing the kind of coherent planning where all of the community partners plays a role. And I guess the last thing that I would add is that under the auspices of the HELP initiative, there are opportunities that develop where leaders in the 5 East End communities that include Larimer, East Hills, Homewood, Lincoln Lemington, and East Liberty, there are some activities where they can join together to lobby politically or to plan collectively for initiatives that improve the entire East End. Things like violence reduction, for instance, dealing with the educational challenges that are brought in by COVID, coordinating and working to make sure that food distribution reaches all parts of the East End. So if listeners are interested, I'd like you to go to the website helppittsburgh.org. That's HELPPGH.org. And that provides an overview of the HELP initiative, and the HELP initiative is available outside of the East End to provide support. And perhaps later, or if people are interested, we'll provide details on how that support can be accessed. So that's a basic overview.
Thanks, Ron. And so I guess for the rest of our guests, if you would please talk a little bit about your agency and what role it plays in housing and economic development in the city, so you know our viewers get a sense of the important work all 3 of you do. Chris, why don't you start? Because I think you start because your work starts first, right?
That's absolutely true. And thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here with everyone tonight. You're right. So the Department of City Planning, we're the only department that really focus on land use and kind of starting first in all of the pre-planning and planning efforts that come along. We're collaborators, so we'll collaborate with the URA and with the Housing Authority as well. For the most part, we are really looking forward to kind of taking a look at 2 avenues in particular, which is Homewood and the avenue in Hazelwood too, because those 2 neighborhoods already have adopted plans. And so it's very critical for our department to kind of create neighborhood plans, but in fact, implement them as well. And so we think this is a great program and process to kind of partner with and do implementation through Avenues of Hope.
Diamonte, you want to go next?
Sure. So good evening and thank you for having me. I think this is my 2nd time on the show, so I'm very excited to be here and talk about Avenues of Hope. So I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the Urban Redevelopment Authority, which is the city's economic development agency. So we are responsible for helping city planning to implement a lot of those adopted neighborhood plans. And so our emergent strategy around economic development is to look at it beyond the massive, huge project, and instead to start to focus on eye-level development and how that impacts the quality of life in neighborhoods, particularly in Black neighborhoods. And so, not that the URA won't focus on big projects, but I think that, there's a comma in that sentence where we also have to think about how do those big projects impact the surrounding community from a jobs perspective, from a housing perspective, and from a commercial, revitalization perspective. And how can we leverage the macro level economic development activity that's happening and making sure that it has maximum impact, but that we don't undermine or undervalue the micro level experience that people experience when they engage in their neighborhood on a day-to-day basis.
Monique?
Thank you. This is my first time on Black Pittsburgh Matters, but I'm very honored to be invited to share the panel with all of the guests that are here today. And so thank you for having me. I'm the Chief Development Officer for the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh. And the way that I like to describe what the Housing Authority does is we provide a foundation of affordable housing and permanent housing for individuals who are extremely low income, very low income, or the folks that are the working poor within the city. This means traditional public housing as well as affordable housing through the mixed finance developments that we support through funding and through other means as well. And when I really think about it, we play three critical roles. We are partners, we're providers, and we're supporters of the work that happens throughout the city as a catalyst in many communities deeply impacted. Oftentimes we're the last to leave, and oftentimes we are the first to put our money in when it's time to reinvest. And so the Housing Authority is a bridge between the federal funding through the housing and urban development, as well as to tie together local resources and investments from private developers as well. So the Housing Authority really is concerned about development, but then also about the people that are housed in our developments and that can take advantage of or need housing throughout the city.
So Monique, go ahead, Ref.
No, I was going to say, Monique, didn't we just get a visit from the Director HUD recently? You want to talk about?
The Secretary of the agency, Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Ben Carson, paid a visit to Bedford Dwellings, to the new Envision Center that exists there. It was a really unique opportunity to focus on the great work that we're doing. Oftentimes when people think development, they think the bricks and sticks, they think the actual buildings, but the Envision Center gives us an opportunity to provide direct resident services, to provide a catalyst through our computer lab or the support services or any of the many services that they can gain by going to the Envision Center. And so it really was quite an event, and it highlighted the work that we're doing for both our residents as well as in the community.
So since you mentioned Bedford Dwellings, you all have done a significant amount of work in the East End and Revs District, rebuilding public housing. You all were successful in receiving a choice neighborhood that is still ongoing. I was actually out there last week and I was shocked and amazed at some of the wonderful parks and the homes that have gone up. But that doesn't come easy, right? There's a very long, contiguous, arduous process to get to that point. And we are attempting to go through that now in the Hill District. We're also attempting on the north side of my district to do something similar over in Fineview, Perry Hilltop area. So for those who are unaware, could you just talk about some of the process it takes to rebuild 400 units or so of public housing into mixed income housing?
Well, as I said, one of the first ways I see ourselves as partners. You cannot do it alone. Working with the city of Pittsburgh, with the Urban Redevelopment Authority, with the teams, it is a really a grassroots also. So it has to be the residents living in the community, and it's really a partnership. It does not happen easily. It is not oftentimes a straightforward process. As I've told people on many occasions, development is, it's a winding road. And in order to make it down that winding road, you have to have everyone's eyes, their ears, all hands on deck. And so what it takes to do this development, these types of developments, besides a lot of investment, it takes a commitment, a grassroots. People in the community have to want the community to change and have to want and be curious about the ways that that can happen. So it takes a partnership. One of the things that we do quite aggressively is outreach. We take time in developing outreach plans and bringing people to the table. Oftentimes it's not just necessarily, as I mentioned, straightforward, but it's really critical. So it takes partnership, it takes an investment from both the city through the URA, it takes land, and it also takes an understanding of the federal rules and regulations. We have an arduous mountain to climb when it comes to redevelopment and it comes to following the federal rules for everything from procurement to building those partnerships, and then also the investment from equity partners and their meeting their expectations as far as what do they expect to see when it gets on the ground. And so it is quite an aggressive and a very arduous process, but it's doable. And so that's where I think it's really critical to make sure that people know that if you are interested in doing this type of work, yes, it's hard work, but it's not insurmountable. There are ways to become educated around the processes. There are ways to become informed and to participate, because it does take everyone to participate.
So the other thing that we've done, we've done the choice, and now the other big thing, although not a choice, but I think would have the choice-like consequences, effects, is this new Avenues of Hope. And so we have with us Diamonte Walker, who in many ways is the architect of the Avenues of Hope. And Diamonte, today I met with a major commercial retailer in our city, and was shocked that that retailer says, I'm committed to Avenues of Hope. I want to facilitate that process, and I'm willing to bring resources to participate. I didn't expect it. It's I think the response has been exciting. So why don't you talk a little bit about, explain the Avenues of Hope a little bit?
Sure. So Avenues of Hope is fundamentally the vision of you and Councilman Lavelle, to rethink how we invest in Black neighborhoods and how we both quantify and qualify that investment, and how we pair that qualification and quantification with improving neighborhood experience and quality of life for Black Pittsburghers. And so the URA has been called to action to become a strategic thought partner and an implementation partner to see how we can take the work that we've been doing over the last maybe 2 or 3 years since Councilman Lavelle and I have sort of been working on this and trying to, drive investment in resources to Black neighborhoods. How can we start to leverage that as a model into, now that we have proof of concept on Center Avenue, can that approach work across the city? It is not the most cost-effective way to do development, because it is experimental and it is a pilot, but it is about 40 to 50 years too late. And so I think when we announced it, I talked a little bit about how this is not really a congratulatory moment for the public sector. It is really a reticent moment where we have to think about, how do we start to look at our resources in such a way that it aligns with the value that is already indigenous in neighborhoods. The neighborhood that I come from, there's been a lot of investment in my neighborhood around affordable housing, not so much investment in the commercial corridor, which has been a challenge. And so the Center Avenue RFQ process sought to do that in a way that would not, sort of serve as an impetus for the G word that we all fear, the word gentrification. And so when you rebuild neighborhoods with the people in them, and you have an aggressive non-displacement strategy paired with that, people can become very comfortable with development. And so I think what Avenues of Hope does is and one thing, it looks at the bricks and mortar, but I think it also incites a feeling of hope, so that people understand that this is not development at their expense. This is development centered on their experiences, their hopes, and their dreams, but it's going to take an all-in strategy. So I am so excited to see the other faces on the phone, because we need city planning. We need Monique at the Housing Authority. Monique and I have had really long conversations about development and different creative ways to do this and approach this. And so you call me the architect of Avenues of Hope. I wouldn't take that much credit for it, but the smart folks at the URA have worked diligently with me to think about a way to look at all the work that we've already been doing around MWB, around access to capital, about cultivating a pipeline of Black developers, working with women entrepreneurs. How can we take all of that work that seems a little bit disparate right now and bring it under one focused results? And so looking at the 7 avenues, we have Homewood, we have Larmer, we have Center, we have 2nd Avenue, we have Warrington Avenue, North and South Perrysville, and Chartiers Avenue. So if you look at that geography, those are all of the intersections of Black life. People are tired of being frustrated. People are tired of having a different lived experience than what they see in Shadyside by nature of their zip code. And so I think that's a scourge, not only on the public sector, but it's also a scourge on those of us who have the power to coalesce private partnerships, the ability to pull together nonprofits, and just to create that mighty fist that can do development in a different way. So I'm very excited about the initiative. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, but with that positive response is going to have to come real action, not rhetoric, not words, not fancy posters and hashtags, but actual investment and actual results. So as we get to this budgetary season, we are looking at the balance sheet. We're looking at the numbers as to, what will it take to see some tangible results in 2021. We're already seeing them in 2020, but it's a multi-year strategy. It's a multi-agency strategy, and it's not something that we can do in a vacuum.
So, Christopher, Diamonte mentioned gentrification, which is a tough issue, at least for me, to grapple with. We are attempting to rebuild affordable housing in our communities. At the same time, we know we need market rate development in order to support a grocery store, for an example, that needs disposable income. We know we need some market forces in order to support the avenues of hope, right? So if we're going to rebuild a Black business district, we have to have individuals there who could actually service this business district. But at the same time, as the director noted, there are those who are fearful of when we rebuild Center Avenue, when we rebuild Bedford dwellings, when this activity takes place, others will see value in it, will come to the neighborhood, values increase, and we slowly get gentrified out of our neighborhood. Can you talk from a planning perspective of any thoughts you may have on how we sort of intentionally plan to keep our neighborhoods as whole as possible while also helping those who are already there thrive? Or are there models or initiatives from other cities or other places or other policies that we should be looking at as it relates to gentrification?
Yeah, I definitely think that the word gentrification itself is such a trigger word. And it's scary, and it's scary for a lot of Black and brown communities. But one thing that Diamonte said was, it is almost 40 or 50 years too late. And so when we're looking at planning, it's almost Avenues of Hope is probably coming in at the most perfect time right now, where we are seeing a social and civil unrest, and we're looking for answers, and people are holding officials accountable for things that have happened and continue to happen. So that's systemic. And with Avenues of Hope, I think it is giving our communities hope that you deserve development, you deserve that coffee shop, you deserve a grocery store, you deserve quality housing. These are all things that essentially build a strong network in a neighborhood. And so when we are putting things that our residents, our neighbors identify with, I think that is not gentrification, that is equitable development. And so it's very important that we move that forward and let this be community driven and engage the community in a way that we are working with smaller developers, and we're looking at companies that our residents and our neighbors are already using to put in on an avenue in their own community. Throughout the nation, we have seen gentrification happen. And, sometimes it has happened in a way that perhaps someone in the very beginning wasn't given in thought. I will say comfortably that we all on this call are definitely given that thought. And so we will make sure that we kind of curate, if you will, some type of commercial business that lends more equity than it is just development. And I think that's the way that we are turning. We're looking to be more inclusive in development and more equitable.
One of the things we learned, and Ron, if you're still with us, I want you to kind of talk about, all of us are professionals in this world. And when every development I've ever done, I've had some group of people go against it because they really didn't understand it, that even despite our best intentions, there's a learning gap because development is technical, it takes a long time, and it can be confusing. Talk a little bit, Ron, about how necessary you think it is to be able to translate development and development goals into languages and into language rather, and into terms that the average person, who's not an architect, who's not a developer, who doesn't have a background in this stuff, who just wants a place to buy bread at, can understand.
Well, I think at the bottom of everything is an acknowledgement that people have legitimate reason to view the world differently, that homeowners who have been in the community a long time and people who are moving into the community as renters often come in with different perspectives and different ideas of what success looks like. So one of the things that we do in the HELP program is work hard to develop a common language. What does a successful community look like? People have been using the terms equitable development and non-displacement. Well, let's talk about Homewood. Homewood, the landmass of Homewood, comfortably held 30,000 people 50 years ago. Now that same landmass holds approximately 6,000 people. So as we begin to talk about opportunities for development, it's clear that you don't have to move anyone out in order to build the community. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is emphasizing that we're not talking at all about displacement. And in fact, anti-displacement, non-displacement is a core part of what we do. Secondly, we talk about the reality that as our communities change, there will be opportunities, and I call them opportunities for racial reconciliation, that there are, as the news tells us every day, there are serious clashes between Black and white that can threaten to destabilize our communities. One of the things that a lot of the leaders in Homewood have really taken as a matter of principle is that Homewood and all of the other East End communities can be communities that are welcoming to diversity, and that thoughts about gentrification need to be discussed against the backdrop that there's no legitimacy in the assertion that people have to be moved out. Now, I will say that it does call on all of us who are involved to be very creative to make sure that people aren't priced out because rents go up, because some of the surrounding properties increase in value. But those are challenges that we can meet. And these are the problems of the 21st century. And what Pam and I do as HELP consultants is not only bring people in who are representing diverse perspectives in the community, but we also look at what's happened in other cities. Pittsburgh is not the first city that's going through the challenge of growing in its urban core. So linking with the URA, linking with city planning, linking with private developers, and really understanding where the sweet spot is for development that's inclusive is something that we have to work hard at, but something that evidence shows is possible.
So Ron, as a follow-up, because you mentioned people not wanting to be displaced, you also mentioned sort of the clash between races, cultures. Part of what I've discovered is when we talk about gentrification, yes, there's a concern about I physically have to move, but there's also the grave concern about cultural gentrification and sort of losing the identity of a neighborhood, the businesses in those neighborhoods. In some respects, we could look at East Liberty, right? When I was young, East Liberty was a place where I could go walk down Penn Avenue, buy bootleg CDs, buy clothes, buy everything I needed on one street, and the men had their tables out, and I could buy books off the tables and everything else. You can't do any of that nowadays. You have a couple businesses left, but people are also very fearful of sort of losing that. Can you talk about, and I think Avenues of Hope gets to this because we're trying to rebuild the community with with the individuals who already live there. But can you talk about some of how we protect the cultural gentrification as well?
I think that's the biggest challenge that we're facing, that creating that planning table that gives value to multiple perspectives. There were 2 points that I'd make immediately. One is that the past is not prologue. The kind of things that went on, well, let me speak personally. I'm from the Hill District, and when I was a kid in the Hill District, Center Avenue and Kirkpatrick Street were the most important intersection in the Black community. And over the past 50 years, that's changed. I think the most important thing, Daniel, is recognizing the difficulty in having some of these discussions. I don't know that there is a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. What I do know is that, one, the commitment to maintaining the cultural integrity of the community happens when you keep people who are concerned about it at the table, that you can't allow others to dictate what that new Pittsburgh, what that new Homewood looks like. And secondly, is that we have to frame the discussion where everything doesn't come down to winners and losers. That as we begin to think about issues of cultural representation, I would argue that there are points in East Liberty that are failures. That's my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for the HELP initiative, but I had my office in Homewood for 35 years. And I know that a lot of the businesses that are along Penn Avenue are not businesses that are really open and accessible by wage earners who don't make a moderate or high income. I believe that Avenues of Hope in the other communities that have been named, Homewood Avenue, Center Avenue, Larmer, going up into Sheridan and some of the others on the north side, that keeping people of African descent at the table in leadership positions and really listening to, honoring, and really making sure that the culture that they bring to the table is in no way rejected or overwrought by new people coming in. But it will be challenging. It will be challenging.
Monique, one of the things I want you, as you know, Pittsburgh is in the midst of an affordable housing crisis, right? We have more people who need houses than houses they can afford. And as we built new affordable housing, there's this stigma about affordable housing or about public housing in particular. In fact, the recent housing we did in Homewood with the Housing Authority, there were people who protested the housing and then saying that it would bring down their property rates. And then after the development was built, they sold that same property for 8 or 10 times more than it was worth before the development. So I just want you to talk a little bit about how the Housing Authority does its business and the kind of product it has and how it's the things it's doing to try to meet the needs for affordable housing in the city of Pittsburgh.
Thank you for that. I would say that the Housing Authority is part of the fabric of the community. We're already here. Our residents are active, and the folks that we work with are part and parcel to everything that happens in the community all throughout the city. So when we go in to do work, oftentimes we're already working where we have been working and looking for new ways and exciting ways to change the dynamic of how it looks. You mentioned, and your other guests have mentioned, gentrification. Well, I think it helps the Housing Authority helps by bringing in partners, working with the community and the grassroots groups, and making everyone be responsible for their own understanding and acceptance and adoption of the communities in which they're coming into, especially in mixed income communities. Now, traditionally, communities weren't so hyper segregated by income. There are oftentimes when, especially in the community I grew up in, at least, you could go across the alley and there would be a teacher, or there would be a doctor down the street, or someone. Their communities were not so segregated from from an economic perspective. And so I think that the way that we do our work in bringing back mixed income communities, as you mentioned, Homewood, and looking for ways to bring market rate units in the same buildings and in the same streets, the same neighborhoods that you have affordable or subsidized units. And so the way that we work is that we look at the community as a whole. What are the real housing needs? We try to make sure that we're congruent, that we are fitting in with what the work that needs to happen is, and then figure out a way to make that happen. It's not driven by what we think, it's driven by what the community needs are. And so when you take that perspective, I think it's really critical to point out that we also are proponents of providing the additional supports that our residents need. Moving from a traditional public housing environment can be a little bit of culture shock, moving into a mixed finance where there are other folks that are coming in and have a different perspective about what their community should look like or how they like to conduct themselves. And so it's all about culture. It's all about understanding and building bridges between individuals coming in and those who've remained in the community. So the Housing Authority goes about it trying to be as delicate as we can, and not going in and just bulldozing everything and coming in with something brand new and saying, okay, just deal with it. It's about bringing people to the table and building understanding and building that sense of responsibility for coming into the community. If you're coming in, you need to be respectful. And that's where we start.
So towards that end, and this is, you can certainly respond, Monique, or anyone else can for that matter. But as we sort of rebuild these communities, there's an example of when we rebuild, I think it was Oak Hill at the time, and some residents who moved back from the original development there were looking to have a gathering. They took their speakers, posted them up to the windows, and blasted their music outside for everyone to hear. In their mind, this was actually a good thing because they were sharing their music with others around them who may not have had a stereo. However, some of the newer residents were a little off put by, why are you doing this and why are you blasting music in where I'm staying now? Can you talk a little bit about, because you started talking about how we educate people and work with people to understand you're now living in a mixed income neighborhood, and there are different expectations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one thing that I would like to point out is that there are more similarities than there are differences in our residents. People want a place to live. They want peace. They want a great, safe, nice place that's clean and well maintained. Now, how they utilize that resource can be different at different times. And so we try to make sure that folks understand that these are your neighbors. We don't identify or point out anybody that's different, like, oh, that person's affordable, or their income is maybe lower, your income is higher. Those distinctions are not made, and it's intentional, and it's part and parcel to their privacy and their rights. What I would say about also our residents, and we have housing that's all throughout the city. You can look at a housing authority supported house, and you would not know that it is affordable housing. You don't know who has potentially a Section 8 voucher living in your community. We don't have marked vehicles when we come around to do any type of maintenance or provide supports for them. So you would never know. It could be your neighbor right now. So we try to be as innocuous as we can with regard to pointing folks out. But to your point, I think that it's also understanding that even so, for instance, through our scattered sites, there's a work requirement. You have to have 2 years of work before you can even qualify for one of the scattered sites units. So it's not so much, as I said, the differences. There are a lot of similarities, and capitalizing on those, bringing people together around their similarities, bringing people together around opportunities to beautify the community or opportunities to participate. And hopefully once the COVID crisis has kind of gone down, we'll have those opportunities to capitalize on those similarities again through community activities, through the supports that are provided. And I think even so in this crisis, people are seeing that we are much more similar than we are different. Working from home or involving yourself more in what's happening in your building, I think, starting to value more the people around us. So.
And if I may make the point, I spent 15 years as an educator at Carnegie Mellon University in the grad school. And I taught a course called Managing in a Multicultural Society. And it was a course that was mandatory for all full-time public policy majors. And we spent a lot of time on developing strategies and building the expertise to have some of these multicultural, multi-economic discussions in communities that are emerging. Because if you look at things like community development block grants, when those grants are given and you ask the community what best personifies a facade program along a business district, you may find that there's a diversity of perspectives, that some people may say, let's celebrate the history of our community from 60 years ago. And another person may say, I want it to be a hip hop ambiance because that's the most important thing to them culturally. And going back to something that was said earlier, this ain't easy. That having some of these discussions will require a lot of work, and a lot of the work is not among people who are of different races. Some of the most telling discussions or disagreements that I've had in my career are Black folks against Black folks. Just put that out there, where Black folks really argued strenuously using Dan's example of blasting the music. It takes work to ameliorate and address cultural clash. And it's a science, it is a profession, it is something that people have to work hard at. And the one thing that I can tell you is that if you frame it solely against the backdrop of winners and losers, you'll have a divided community. That there is middle ground, and it's hard to find sometimes, and sometimes even when you find it, it's shaky. But that's what professionals do. That's why all of us who are engaged in facilitating and managing these kind of discussions have to have the competencies, the skills to really guide people on turf that's new to them. It's something that many people have never had to do before, get along. But if we want our communities to be authentically mixed, if we want our communities to be culturally accepting, if we want our communities to have as a foundation no displacement, then we have to work at it.
If I can add one other note on that, if it's okay, when we talk about affordable housing, I think one thing that we don't realize is that affordable housing is not the same thing as low income housing. And that people in Pittsburgh will tell you that there is very little low income housing available. HACP may be the largest provider of high quality low income housing that is not in a mixed income community. And so when we talk about affordable housing, we really have to think about what's economically feasible. We can all afford a different type of housing on this call. So affordable housing for me isn't going to be the same as what it is for somebody else. So we use that term and we conflate it with poverty. And I think what people have to understand is that because we have an income crisis in Pittsburgh, people that are making a pretty decent living, $60,000, $70,000 a year, can't afford to live in the city of Pittsburgh right now because the housing is not reasonably affordable to the average Pittsburgh earner. And so we say affordable housing and then we leave out the average Pittsburgh earner. And so when we talk about this and we strategize around this, I think that we've got to look at income feasibility. And that when you scratch the surface of affordable housing, you're going to find an income issue. When you scratch the surface of an income issue, you're going to find an education issue. And when you scratch the surface of an education issue, you're going to find tabletop issues that are impacting families. So we are talking about the symptoms, the lack of availability of affordable housing, and we're not talking a lot about the root cause and how these systems and these institutions need to start to disrupt that vicious cycle. So that's another one of my hopes for Avenues of Hope, is that we begin to stop painting everything with such a broad brush and painting everybody with a broad brush, because the one thing that is really plaguing Black communities, particularly Black communities in Pittsburgh, I don't think that it's cultural clash. I think it's a class clash. And we haven't yet learned about how to talk about the economic strata on which Black people exist, and how appetites on one side of that strata is one thing, and on the other side it's another. And there is this level of income privilege that comes with that.
I think that's very interesting too. And everyone's comments about affordability and the stigma that comes with affordable housing. I think that through affordable housing, and as I'm co-leading the citywide housing initiatives here in Pittsburgh, I'm always reminded that the working class or middle working class needs affordable housing too. So in 2015, the city embarked on the housing needs assessment, and it was identified that we had a gap of 20,000 housing units that we needed for affordable housing. And so one thing that we're working on now from the department is to update that housing needs assessment. So we have an RFP out right now that's taking a look at AMI and feasibility for affordable housing and what that truly means, and kind of taking a look at more inclusive design standards and more inclusive housing for mixed incomes too. The housing needs assessment will be particularly helpful for Avenues of Hope, going to our comp plan and economic development, because we do need to identify where we really need that gap to be filled. And I think if anyone wants to say, well, how are we going to do it? I think this is a good starting team right here to kind of take the lead and take the charge and use that data and really make impactful change.
So we're coming up on our hour. So I want to bring Micah in, who's been monitoring the live questions, so that she can ask a few of those questions. But Chris, just as a follow-up, the housing needs assessment, when it gets conducted, will it also be able to look at a community and say, yes, we're short of this amount of housing, but if we're looking at this community comprehensively, we should really be targeting this level of market rate, this level of affordable, this level of workforce? Will it be able to get into the weeds like that per communities?
Yeah, the hope is that, and listening to this call too, we want a well-rounded balance throughout the city. And I think even to Monique's point of, if we have saturated affordable housing in one area, we're going to see those certain cultural clashes or classes, as someone mentioned. But if we see it spread out, there are neighborhoods that can withstand more affordable housing than they have now. And so if we're looking at a more inclusive Pittsburgh, we're looking at affordable housing throughout. And again, that isn't like, when we say affordable housing, and unfortunately it has such a terrible stigma, but we're looking at the working class or the single parent who cannot afford quality housing and ultimately have to live in a place where he or she does not feel that's desirable for them. So how do we kind of blur some of these neighborhood boundaries and just seek opportunities where we have a stable housing stock for more people to afford? And that is the goal.
Thank you. Micah? You're on
Muted, Micah.
Apologies. Yes, so our first question was from Donna. She said, as Councilman spoke of the $30 million we received for the development with the Housing Authority, along with other partners, we'd like to see a little more funding to finish the Larimer corridor. So how is the Avenue of Hope leveraging funding for our Black neighborhoods?
That's embedded in those are three different answers, right? Diamonte, you want to take the first crack at it?
So we'll probably have to tackle this together, as you said, but I think that, so when you look at the URA and the work that the URA has done around the choice neighborhood, which was reimagining what rental looks like in the neighborhood, and then some tangential support for the surrounding homeownership community. The business district is not addressed, but it is in process. And so what I will say the URA is doing, we are actually going to serve as the leaseholder for a major commercial space along the corridor, which will allow small minority-owned or Black-owned businesses to be able to get into that commercial rental market relatively affordably. The URA leverages the Housing Opportunity Fund, which is a $10 million trust fund. We leverage that into about $40 million of affordable housing investment across the city of Pittsburgh. It is our hope in this budgetary cycle to be able to do some commercial leverage that could be on par with what we see on the housing side. It would be a pilot year for something like that, but I am talking to two council folks here and hoping that, that we can work across the aisle and be very creative in how we think about that. Larimer has been identified as an avenue of hope. It has a plan, I believe, at least maybe in the choice neighborhood context. So I think we're going to revisit that plan and look at the pieces that were not done, talk to the community, understand what the priorities are, and then try to earmark some funding and some investment to finish that choice neighborhood plan.
Monique, talk a little bit about the commercial part of I think it's phase 4 is phase 3. I get confused which one's which. I think it's actually phase 3 maybe. You'll know better than me.
Well, I will have to say that if you're referring to, and that's part of the East Liberty Choice neighborhood activities. And so currently we're looking at the support for the housing. As you know, the Housing Authority, we do housing, but there's also a partnership with the URA for the investment in the commercial portion of that. There's an auditorium, there was an old gymnasium that needed to be utilized in some way. And so working with our partners, they're able to look at how do we bring a commercial aspect to that. So it's been really exciting looking at ways to partner with the URA and look for ways to bring that economic development to that area. So as part of the Corridors of Hope, looking at how we build that economic support. The housing supports the businesses. No people, nobody to patronize the businesses. So we have to have the people, we have to bring the folks into the community, and then look at how do we sustain it in order to be able to sustain the businesses. So perhaps Diamonte could look a little more closely or address a little more closely the economic development portion, which would fall more into her bailiwick. So with that, I'll hand that over.
Let me just say a little bit to the person who's watching us, that rebuilding Lorimer, we cannot do it with public dollars alone, right? As much of the public dollars we put in, we're only going to rebuild a fraction of the land space of Lorimer. Even 400 homes is still a fraction of the land space. There are other entities, such as a school. There's a school that wants to put a park, an athletic field there. We have another organization wants to put a squash building there. That you really need to partner with because you have so much land. What you really want to do is partner with a variety of sources to bring a variety of venues to the neighborhood, so that it will be attractive to a cross section of people. Because each venue brings its own kind of unique person into the community, which will support its own unique businesses. Am I missing something, Diamonte? You're on mute.
It's going to take public-private partnerships. And so I really, our role in this is if we go sort of first money in, that starts to attract philanthropic partners, corporate partners, who then start to deem these places worthy of investment, looking at the investment of the city and the URA as sort of a backstop and a guarantee. So this, I said in the beginning that this is not a one agency strategy. The URA is a partner in this. We don't own the entirety of Avenues of Hope, but we'll certainly continue to listen to the community and try to forge partnerships that are going to produce results.
I think we also had another question from Ms. Walker about why there were so few Black businesses in Pittsburgh and what resources are available for existing owners in the current pandemic.
Okay, so the question was, why are there so few Black businesses in Pittsburgh?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I guess that's a proportional question. We make up about, what is it, like 26% of the population in Pittsburgh. And I think that African-American women are the fastest growing sector, starting and developing businesses. I think part of the challenge, and one of the things that I've been talking about, is I don't think that we do a good enough job in helping people to understand the types of businesses that are worth starting. So our startup strategy in Pittsburgh leaves a lot to be desired. And so we see a burgeoning sort of lifestyle business atmosphere ecosystem starting to emerge. But I would love to see Pittsburgh sort of have a big, hairy, audacious goal of being the place where Black people should come to start businesses. And when we look at our existing population, how can we start communicating and educating in a way where people can build businesses around cottage industry? So what is UPMC purchasing? What are some of our, what are tech firms doing? And how do we start aligning people with those interests? And so I don't think that we've done enough work on that. I've been working over the last couple of years to start to look at that, but there's a lot more to be done. But we need a comprehensive startup business strategy in Pittsburgh. And then the other piece that is missing, there's this big gap for growth. Like, we're not talking to Black businesses about how to scale and grow in Pittsburgh. And so if it's hard to get a contract in Pittsburgh, not just with the public sector, but in the corporate sector, you're going to go to another market where people are going to make it easier to do business. Pittsburgh has to get out of this loop of talking about diversity and inclusion. And I was on a panel earlier and I said, diversity and inclusion are nouns. We need to diversify and include. We need the verbs to start to take precedent. And I think when we get over this echo chamber of hearing ourselves talk about it, even though that's important, and we start doing it and we start putting our money and our influence and our power where our mouths are, I think we're going to start to see a different result.
Director Walker.
Can I add one little item? I agree with everything that has been said. I think also we have to look at Pittsburgh from a regional attractant standpoint. We have to look at it and say, it's not just attracting the same businesses and the same ecosystem. We need to look at an expanded ecosystem and to become a magnet for other interested entrepreneurs or other businesses that have maybe started somewhere else, and this is a better place to be. And so oftentimes, if you're looking at those type of businesses that are cottage industries, they're not just local to what's in the city limits, but we have to think maybe regionally about how to bring in more individuals who do have the funds to invest or who are interested in partnering with residents who live here and helping them understand and grow businesses that can have a global impact, and to start thinking larger around what can we do for this along the avenue. What can we do for that business to be impactful regionally? And so I think that that's something to consider.
Also, real quick, Director Walker, the URA, you have been doing a lot of work to actually support minority businesses here in the city. You were doing it pre-COVID crisis, but you've even given it more light since COVID. So for those who are watching or paying attention, if you could just share quickly some of the resources the URA does have to support minority businesses here in the city.
Absolutely. So when I got to the URA, I arrived as the MWBE program officer, and one of the first things I addressed was the fact that the URA was not offering a product that was right suited for minority and women-owned businesses. So we developed a micro loan program, modeling it after Detroit's program. There was a hesitancy to do that because folks felt like, well, maybe they won't pay back these loans. It's super risky. Detroit's rate at that time was like 8%, like an 8% default rate. And I said, if Detroit can do it, Pittsburgh can too, if not beat it. And so we started the micro loan program in 2018. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because that became the model and the format to be able to very quickly create an emergency loan fund program for those experiencing economic strain during COVID. We literally changed the name of the micro loan program and deployed some resources we didn't know we would have to deploy in 2020 in order to start helping these businesses. And that's been subscribed by over 80% of those borrowers are minority or women-owned businesses. And so out of that, the URA's business solutions team has gotten very creative about creating a whole other suite of programs, helping folks get online and create e-commerce platforms. If they didn't have web presence before COVID, now they're able to do business online. Neighborhood Allies is our partner on that. We were able to secure $10 million in funding from the PNC Foundation. $6.5 million of that has gone towards creating a micro business growth and recovery fund. So up to $100,000 in capital for minority-owned businesses. We've also provided some, we pay for technical assistance for minority developers to do the pre-development on their projects, and you will see them emerge on Center Avenue as a part of Avenues of Hope, and helping them adapt and shift their performance based on the impacts of COVID. So if you go to www.ura.org, you will see a listing of all of our programs. I'm like looking at my phone a little bit here because we're working through some creative solutions to some dollars that may come down to continue to think about how we can help diverse businesses adapt to COVID. So the URA started doing this work back in 2017, 2018. Councilman Lavelle, I sometimes think that you are prophetic because the direction that you started shifting the URA in has really helped poise us to be able to be a rapidly responsive agency in the time of COVID.
Monique,
Thank you. Go ahead.
Monique, just in case we may have viewers who need housing, would you explain to them how, because sometimes even when they call me, we have various ways that you enter into our system for housing. So if you probably just go through a little bit how someone applies if they want to have housing with the Housing Authority, what's the process?
Well, there you have it. So working on the development side primarily, I would hate to give you misinformation, but what I can say is that if you go to the Housing Authority's website, and there are any number of portals that you can tap into to find out exactly how to access our housing. We have both traditional public housing through and applications that you can address and tap into those resources, as well as going to the individual developments that we partner with in order to tap into that. We have a singular, what we call a waiting list, although folks don't like to maybe use that word. But if you go to our website, there's a lot of information. So HACP website, you'll be able to find that information out. I would hate to give misinformation. And so working on the development side, that's one of my disadvantages, which I will make sure that you provide some information for yourself to have for that.
Thank you. So it's hacp.org. And I believe you all's website is your phone number, excuse me, is 412-456-5000.
Yes.
And then if you need support from the URA, it's ura.org. And the phone number is 412-255-6600. And with that, we have exhausted all our time for today's show. And I want to thank all our guests for joining us. Specifically, I want to thank Mr. Ron Porter from the Help Pittsburgh Initiative, Mr. Christopher Corbett from Pittsburgh City Planning, Ms. Diamonte Walker, the Deputy Executive Director of the Urban Redevelopment Authority, and Ms. Monique Pierre, the Chief Development Officer for the Housing Authority in the City of Pittsburgh. In order to have significant investment in the Black community, it is imperative that we work with all these organizations and agencies in order to collectively rebuild Black communities in our city by Black people for Black people in conjunction with our partners and our allies.
Again, I want to thank all of you who are watching us tonight and participating in this town hall meeting. Remember, you can watch this show on Facebook, the city's YouTube channel, or the city's cable channel. A new meeting occurs every Wednesday. By working together, united purpose, we can transform our city, strengthen it for all its residents. Pittsburgh can be a city for all when it becomes a city where Black Pittsburgh matters. Good evening, stay safe, and be blessed.